Voltaire is, I know, you have read Voltaire when you were 16, one of your favorite writers as well, and that you share something with his hero Candide. An unsubstantiated sense of optimism. You have written in the New Yorker recently that you share with Candide, I tend not to be a pessimist, so I've always felt Candide to be a kind of ancestor. What inspires in Sir Salman a sense of optimism at a time of war in Iran, in the Ukraine, after the attack on you in 2022? Why didn't you lose your sense of optimism?
It's a kind of stupidity. I mean, as you know, the subtitle of Voltaire's novel is Optimism, Candide ou l'optimisme. And Candide is an idiot.
Now you say it?
Yeah. So I am the child of Candide, and I'm the same kind of idiot. No, I mean, actually, I've always had this streak of hopefulness. People who are my friends make fun of me for the reason you say, that there's very little in the world to be hopeful about right now. But I persist. And I think there's something about being a writer which requires a degree of optimism. Because books take a long time to write, except for some writers. But you could spend, I've spent 5 years writing a book several times. And so for a very long period of time, you sit alone with yourself and the tyranny of the empty page. And you have to hope that you're not spending your time in vain. You know, that when you finish the book and you offer it to the world, that it will find a favorable reception and that it will meet its readers and all that. To do that, to make that effort of giving up such a large piece of your life, 5 years of your life, 3 times. Midnight Children took 5 years. The Satanic Verses took 5 years. The Ground Beneath Her Feet took 5 years. The Moor's Last Sigh took 4 years. It's a long project, writing a book. And to do that without having some kind of spirit of hopefulness, it's impossible, So the nature of being a writer requires a level of optimism. There are, of course, very pessimistic writers, but it shows in their books.
There is a sense of a sharing, a red thread of your stories, the sense of an ending. All of these stories deal with an ending, kind of a last act in a human life.
Yeah.
Is that because you are turning 79 this year?
Yes, although I expect to live to 150, so I'm quite young.
I think you share some qualities with one of my favorite characters in literature, that is the Hobbit Bilbo Beutlin. I expect to be at your party for your 111th birthday.
Yes, or to put it precisely in Tolkien language, the 11th birthday.
The 11th birthday, I'm sorry.
The 111th, but that's quite young. I mean, I told you this before, but there's a Woody Allen story that some sycophantic journalist said to him he must be very happy that he would always live on in his movies. And he said, no, he would prefer to live on in his apartment. That's my view. I mean, my wife and I have decided we should start planning my 100th birthday. And obviously it should be a dance party.
I hope we have a chance of a second party in Potsdam for that.
No, I was telling you I should just tell the Günter Grass story, because when Günter Grass had his 70th birthday celebration in Hamburg at the Thalia Theater, I was one of the few non-German, and the whole of German literature was there, But his 3 friends who were English-speaking writers was Nadine Gordimer, John Irving, and me. And we were there to celebrate him. But the interesting part of the evening was when the celebration ended and the audience left, some of us were asked to stay, then there was a party on the stage. And Grass revealed himself to me as he's a brilliant dancer. I was so envious. All the girls were lining up to polka and tango and gavotte and waltz and foxtrot with Günter, and he was twirling everybody around the room. I thought, this is unfair. That you're a writer and you're an artist and now you're a dancer? Not right. So I have to practice my dancing before my 100th birthday.
But back to the morose side of literature.
Oh, yes.
What is this sense of an ending that ties your stories together?
Well, I just thought, if you reach a point in your life where the days ahead are fewer than the days behind, you have to think about it. And if you're a writer, you think about it on the page. And so I had been, some of these stories are not new, for example, the story in the South about the two old men arguing, I wrote when I was much younger. And actually the thing I'm proud about in that story is that I was able to imagine old age before I was that old. I was only something like 60 when I wrote that story. And to imagine 80 when you're 60 feels impossible, but I did it. So that's my little pat on the back to myself. But I did think, writing these stories, about what is it like to be in the final act of life. If you're in the fifth act, if you're in a Shakespeare play and you're in the fifth act, first of all, you have to feel relieved you're still alive. Because in Shakespeare, people drop off in earlier acts. Polonius is dead by the end of Act 2. Ophelia is dead by the end of Act 3. So to get to the fifth act is already an achievement. But then you have to think, how do you spend that time? Do you spend it in peacefulness and acceptance and resignation? Or do you, like Dylan Thomas, you rage against the dying of the light? And so a lot of the characters in this book are facing that kind of question.
Obviously, that implies the question, this first story of these garrulous old men in the southern part of India, Madras, I think, is their city. How does Salman Rushdie experience age? Is writing becoming easier with age?
No, I
or
always
not?
tell young writers that it gets harder. I think that, when you're young, if you want to be a writer, you have some little handful of powerful energy that drives you to tell whatever it is you have to tell. And that pushes you into the world of the book. But at a certain point, you've used that. Then what? What do you do then? And that business of finding the second and third and fourth act of your life, finding the next story and the next way of seeing the world and the next way of understanding yourself, that's the writer's life, So it doesn't get easier, it gets harder. Also, there is just a comic problem, which is the problem of unintentional repetition. And the people who tell you this are your translators. Nobody reads you as carefully as your translator in the world. And I had an example when my translator into Danish sent me, they're very polite, sent me a very polite email where he said, on page 232 of your new novel, such and such character says this. And as of course 20 years ago, in your earlier novel, such and such, on page 132, this completely different character says the same thing. And because they're extremely polite, and I just wanted to understand why you wanted to make an intertextual connection between these two books. And then you have to pretend you did it on purpose.
Now, your venerable colleague, Albert Camus, once said, "Fiction is a lie that we tell us in order to tell the truth."
Yes.
I woke up this morning and I listened to the news on the radio. And I couldn't quite escape a sense of hilariousness, of ironic hilariousness, that I'm talking tonight with somebody who is making up very, very elaborate literary lies. That is what literature is about. But you are competing with politicians in Russia, in Iran, in Washington, who are the biggest liars in the world. I mean, how do you feel about this
I think
competition?
I think they win that competition. But, I think that it's a good question because, yes, the world is very full of untruth right now. And even the idea of truth becomes problematic because it's something that one person believes to be true, another person believes to be a lie, and vice versa. Some people believe that the American election was fixed. Other people know that it wasn't fixed. But you can't persuade anybody across that dividing line. Anyway, but what I wanted to say is something that Margaret Atwood also said in a different way, which is that although there is a superficial similarity between the lies of public figures and the untruth of literature, actually they're opposites, because the purpose of literature, whatever technique it uses, whether it's surrealist or naturalistic or science fiction or romantic or romantasy, which is the new word, it doesn't matter. The purpose of literature is in some way to move towards the truth about human beings. It's to say, what are we like? Why are we like it? What do we do to each other? Why do we do that? In what ways are we noble? In what ways are we bad or fail ourselves? The big questions of what human life is like is what literature seeks to talk about, and to tell some kind of truth about that. And actually the techniques don't matter, the purpose matters. The purpose is the truth. Whereas, of course, the political untruth exists to obscure the truth. It's a way of saying the opposite of the truth and masking the truth by the lie. So although these two things superficially seem to have something in common, actually they're opposites, and not only opposites, they may be adversaries. Which is why authoritarian figures of power have always feared creative artists. Why do they fear us? We don't have any tanks. We don't have AK-47s. We don't even have that big a following. If we say, follow me, about 6 people get up. So we're not able to, in any serious way, impact the power of the powerful. And yet they fear us. Look, in the beginning of the Spanish Civil War, one of the first things that happened was the murder of Garcia Lorca by the gangs of Generalissimo Franco. Why were they afraid of Lorca? He's a lyric poet. He's a gay lyric poet whose ability to create a revolution is very limited. But they feared him because he told the truth. And I've often thought that literature is very powerful and outlasts or oppresses it. Writers are weak. So, for example, Lorca is dead. He died very young. He was murdered. The poetry of Lorca is alive, and the Falange is dead. If you look at the time of the Soviet Union, Osip Mandelstam was persecuted by Stalin and died in a labor camp. The poetry of Mandelstam we have. The Soviet Union, we kind of don't have. Although I know there's people trying to reinvent it, but that's another story. Even if you go back to ancient times, the poet Ovid upset Caesar Augustus with something he wrote. We don't even know what it was that Augustus Caesar was angry about. But he exiled Ovid, he threw him out of Rome, he went and had to live in a little village on the shore of the Black Sea, and he spent the rest of his life sending begging letters, begging to be allowed to come home to Rome. And he was never allowed to do so. He died in exile. But we have the poetry of Ovid, and the Roman Empire no longer exists. So in the long term, the tyrant dies and the art survives. In the short term, the artist dies and the tyrant survives. This is the problem we face.
That is a problem, I imagine.
Yeah.
Now, for somebody, I said in the introduction, you have become a kind of an emblem, a symbol for the freedom of speech movement, for the freedom of literature, for the right to express yourself in fiction, for the free speech movement.
Well, I'm in favor of those things.
Of course. But when you get up, you don't want to be an emblem, you don't want to be a symbol, you want to be a living human being,
I don't feel emblematic. I don't feel symbolic. Because I'm here I am. And, a symbol is the Statue of Liberty. And what she's a symbol of, there's some confusion about. But I'm not a bronze statue in a harbor. I'm a working writer. And I'm trying to make my work. And it's not finished. I hope I have some more to do. And I'm much more interested in the next book than in the last 23. So I always hope that people will in some way get past the noise that has surrounded my life and get to the books, because the books are not bad. And they will surprise you. People who read the satanic verses, I can't tell you how many people, there are some very consistent responses. Really two things. Some people say to me, can you tell me where the dirty bit is? But I can't find it. And I say, well, maybe it's not there. And the other thing they say is, who knew that it was funny? And I say, people who read it knew that it was funny. Because, of course, a lot of the attack on the work was made by people who had not read it, including the man who attacked me, who by his own admission had never read a word I'd written. The fact that you're willing to commit murder, to murder somebody who you know nothing about, is an indication of how indoctrination works, how brainwashing works. But for me, I'm just trying to get out from under all that noise and say, please read one of my books.
What was it like for you when you wrote this first sentence of this story?
Oh, I was very surprised. because I wasn't expecting to murder him. I thought he would be alive and have this relationship with this young student. But then I killed him. But actually, I'm very fond of my ghost, because he feels almost to me like an immigrant. He's like somebody who's arrived in a country where he doesn't know anything. He doesn't know the rules of the world he's in. He doesn't know what laws he has to follow, or if there are any laws. And can he connect with other people, or is he alone by himself for the rest of his life? He's like a foreigner in the land of the dead. He doesn't know the rules of being dead. There's a very funny short story I was thinking of. The British writer Will Self wrote this story called, what is it called? It's called The North London Book of the Dead. And in it, there's this young man whose mother has died. And he's sad. And he's walking home one day, and a double-decker bus goes past, and he sees his mother on the top shelf. And it's not somebody who looks like his mother, it's his mother. How can it be? Because she's dead. So he goes back the next day at the same time, the same bus goes by, and his mother's on the bus. So he follows her, and she gets off the bus at a very kind of second-rate North London neighborhood called Muswell Hill. And she goes into a basement apartment. And he follows her, and then when she's not there, he breaks into the apartment and looks. And it turns out that when you're dead, you don't go to heaven or hell, you go to Muswell Hill. And that's your fate. And my ghost has something similar, that he's dead, but he's still around. And he doesn't know why. And he doesn't know if it's forever or just for some time. and he doesn't know what he's supposed to do. He's lost, and I felt very like him. If you've had the experience of coming from one world to another and you don't know the rules of the new world, you're lost, and so being dead is just one version of that.
The author you invent for this story is really a composite character.
Yes.
Stairwell A is a keyword. One sees that the story is set obviously in Cambridge.
Yes.
In King's College.
Yeah, neither the university nor the college is named, but it's pretty obviously Cambridge, and it's pretty obviously King's College, which was also my college.
What a coincidence.
Just one of these accidents that happened. I'd wanted to write something about that moment of my life, but also the moment of British society when I was at college. This is the late 60s. And I graduated in 1968. I was 21 years old. And as I said to you before we came out, that this is the year which is the historical epicenter of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And I participated in at least one of those things. But it was a moment when the world was changing, when the ideas of the 1950s and so on were being replaced by more modern ideas about women, more modern ideas about gay people, more modern ideas. Well, it was the high point of the protest against the Vietnam War. Many things were changing. And so I thought to try and set a book at that hinge moment, set a story, Also in the small world of the university, like when I was at university, there were only 3 women's colleges, and there were like 18 men's colleges, which didn't admit women at all, and had not admitted women for 900 years. And then at the end of the 60s, the beginning of the 70s, everything changed, and all the colleges changed, and they let women in. So that also was, like in the university, was a transformative moment. And so I wanted to set a story at this moment when everything is changing. And I had the good fortune to be there at some of that moment, and also to meet some extraordinary people. And for me, the great memory is that as a 19-year-old person, I met the great writer E.M. Forster, who was a fellow of the college and was living on the campus. This is the author of Passage to India. And he was nice to me. We didn't become friends, but I talked to him. And so he also is sort of one of the origins of the character of the ghost. And the other is somebody I never met, who was also a great man, Alan Turing, who was the head of the group in World War II, the British group, whose job was to decode the German messages. And because this was called Enigma, because the Enigma system broke the German ultra machine and its secrets, the British knew what the Nazis were trying to do, and it gave them an enormous edge. Maybe people say that it took maybe 2 or 3 years off the war, because the Nazi armies had no secrets from the Western Allies. And yet both of these men, great men, geniuses in their way, were badly treated. And they were badly treated for a very simple reason, which is they were homosexual. And homosexuality at that time in England was illegal. So their lives were criminal. And they were both dreadfully punished, unfairly and unjustly punished. They had that in common. And so I thought, well, since they have that extraordinary fact about their lives in common, I can squash them into the same character and tell that story, and tell the story of the injustice. And the ghost is somebody looking for justice. The reason he can't die, because he's not at peace, is that he can't rest until he has justice. And so I said this on television yesterday, there's justice for ghosts. Why should ghosts not have justice? And the other thing was, the thing I haven't said before is that for many, many years, I wanted to write a story arising out of the King Arthur myth. the Knights of the Round Table, all that. I tried many times to find a way of telling a modern story around that, and I always failed. I just had no story at all. And then, as you found out, my ghost is called Arthur, and the code-breaking unit that he becomes part of calls itself the Round Table. And so that moment of the Second World War and these people who came from all kinds of strange backgrounds, they were college academics, they were people who were very good at crossword puzzles, they were chess players, and all these strange talents allowed them to break codes. And they were this secret group. After the war, they couldn't tell anybody what they did because there was the Secrets Act. They went back into their private lives. They didn't keep in touch with each other. The quest for the Grail was over. And it was only after the 30-year rule, when these matters became public, when the general public knew that these people had been so incredibly important in the war effort, and they had done nothing to publicize themselves. So they were knights, they were honorable, and they wanted nothing for themselves. And it's so impressive, that story, that to be able to write something about it was a great pleasure.
I think I have one more question definitely that I want to hear you about. That is, if I remember correctly, when you wrote the Satanic Verses, you had a sign posted in front of your desk, if my information is correct. A sign where you say that read, "While writing a novel, you enter into an inversed Faustian pact. To gain immortality, you lose or spoil your mundane life." Sir Salman, you were married, if I remember correctly, you are married 5 times. It doesn't really sound like you totally reserved your mundane life.
I don't see why you don't understand that marriage is like hell. Dr. Faustus maybe would have been punished by Mephistopheles by multiple marriages. Look, I was happily married several times. And unhappily married a couple of times.
Salman Rushdie hatte sowohl glückliche wie unglückliche
I've got nothing to say on this subject.
Sir Salman, you have been spending well over 50 years of your life sitting mostly alone in a room, confronting the tyranny of the white paper. Mm-hmm. What have you found out about yourself in all of this time?
Well, one answer to that is 23 books long. Yeah. So, read those books. But I think one of the things you learn as any kind of artist is your ambition is very great. You hope to make wonderful things. And then you realize in the act of making that your ability is less than your ambition. So that there's always, of course, there are exceptions to this. Michelangelo, Shakespeare, Goethe. There are exceptions, but very, very, very few exceptions. Mostly we find that between the ambition of the project and the achievement of the project, there's a gap. And your task as a writer is to make the gap as small as possible. But to eradicate the gap, that's probably not possible. So you always dream bigger than you can do. And I guess that's human life, And we have to accept that about ourselves. We're not as good as we think.
We are taking dancing lessons in Potsdam to celebrate your 100th birthday.
Yes.
In order that we can have a dance party with tango and with polka. And
it's a good stage.
Everything, I think.
Thank you.
Sir Salman, thank you for visiting the Lit Potsdam.
Thank you.